In this video, we're going to discuss how to use WebSense, AP data, and AP endpoint features to control USB removable media policies in your organization. When we talk about USB removable media, we're talking about USB hard drives, USB flash drives, jump drives, on that sort of thing. These devices are very easy to use and they're very portable, so they're commonly used in organizations to move information between PCs. But unfortunately, due to that portability and ease of use, they're also used to leak information out of organizations, or they're a common source of data theft as they get lost in transit or stolen, and then that data is available. So we're going to use WebSense technology to deploy some policies to show you the power of the solution. In this case, what we'll do is we'll create a policy to completely stop USB writing altogether, as well as create a policy that uses encryption in a transparent method so that any of your devices in your organization or on your network or off your network can access the information, but a personal device or a device outside the organization would not be able to access the information. Before we set up these policies, I thought I'd refer to our support site, which is easily accessed from websense.com, and then you can click on the support tab, and then you can search for what you're looking for. So we're going to use a couple different components of the solution here, but a couple things that might be helpful is getting the endpoint installed. So I'm going to search for endpoint installation here and press the search tab, and I like to narrow my results over here. So this is part of our data security suite. We're using the new Triton AP Data 8.0 feature. So I'm going to narrow my results. And this top one, Endpoint Solutions Installation Overview, is a good one to start reading. I already have the endpoint installed, which I'll show you a little bit later, but getting the endpoint down on your end user devices is sort of a critical piece of what we're going to show today. And inside of this article, there's this installation and deployment guide, which actually links to a PDF, which I've just downloaded to my desktop. And we won't review this, but I strongly encourage you to read this. It shows you how to build the endpoint as well as how to distribute it with things like GPO or SCCM. And there's other resources on the support site that go through that as well. It talks about supported versions, etc. This is well beyond the scope of what we're going to talk about today, but definitely go ahead and get this file and do some research on it. Another thing that we're going to want to do is just talk about encryption, because we will use that later. So I'm going to go ahead and do a search for removable media encryption, and another article will come up that does a good job of explaining some of the options available, and I'll go ahead and explain these throughout the demo today. But if you click this first one, configuring encryption for removable media, it explains the couple options that we'll talk about today, and specifically the encrypt with profile key, which is sort of that transparent encryption that protects your organization but doesn't cause users to have to remember passwords or anything like that. So there's a wealth of information here on the support side, and I highly encourage you to do some research on your own before you deploy that. And hopefully with this video will be very helpful. Before I go into the Triton Manager, I just wanted to show you I do have the endpoint on my system, so it's already been deployed, which is explained in that PDF. And I do have a USB drive already plugged into this PC. There happens to be nothing on it, but I've created two files on my desktop. One is just FileZilla free FTP client software. That's an exe. And I've also created this testfile.docx. And inside of it, I just wrote this document as a test file. Just wanted to show that I have no policy, so I'm very easily able to drag and drop that over here, and I have these files. And fortunately, these files don't really have any risk of being leaked or stolen, because they're of no value. But if they were, I took this USB key out and I left it somewhere, or my laptop bag was stolen, that data would be in anybody's hands. So we're going to talk about a couple ways to prevent either information from getting on a USB drive at all, or to use this encrypt with profile key, which will really protect your organization and not stop the ability to use convenient storage like USB removable media. So I'm going to go ahead and delete those because we're going to kind of start fresh here. So now that we've got endpoint installed and we've sort of covered our kind of support reconnaissance, we're going to go ahead and go into our Triton Manager here, and I am running the new 8.0 APX suite, so this is AP Data and AP Endpoint. But everything that we're going to talk about today is also available with earlier versions like 7.8 and 7.8 derivatives. So for the most part, the user interface will be pretty much identical, as will the features be. So first what we're going to do is just sort of log into our data portal, which I've already done. And I'll show you a couple things that we won't use, but they might be helpful as you plan your deployment. Under resources, we do have this Endpoint Devices, and this is where we can very specifically talk about very certain types of USB devices. By default, we'll go ahead, for the sake of this demo, and just apply this to any USB removable drive or removable device. But if you wanted to be very specific and create a particular rule that said only USB devices from this manufacturer distributed by our corporation could be used, or different policies, we could create like a marketing team USB device name, and maybe we'll just use SanDisk as an example. SanDisk Cruiser. These are drives that will only be used by the marketing team, and you can only use a SanDisk Cruiser. That way, people aren't bringing their own media. And we do support wildcards, so you could put, SanDisk Cruiser in there, and then it will only allow this policy when that type of media is used. You can create a more specific one with a specific model number in it, and so on and so forth. But we're not going to use that, but I just wanted to point that out because it is a nice, convenient feature. So I'll go ahead and press cancel there, because by default, we're just going to make policy based on all USB devices, which is what more often than not people are going to do. So the first thing we're going to do is a very simple policy. We're going to basically prohibit writing of any media to USB drives. And we're going to do that by creating a content classifier for basically all files. So that's done by hovering over content classifier and selecting file properties. Now inside of here we actually have a bunch of predefined file property classifiers. And what's nice about these is they're not based on extension, they're actually based on the metadata in the header of the file. So if you really wanted to create a very specific policy that said, don't allow writing of PDF or EXE or those types of things, you can use our predefined policies, and even if somebody changes the extension name or removes the extension, we'll still be able to identify that file as an executable or as a PDF, or obviously there's a long list of different ones in here, different types of Office files. So that way, if you have very specific things you want to put policy on, you can do that. But sort of the catch-all, all files will be done by creating a new one, which we can sort over here by name. I've already created this called all files, but to create your own, you would click this new button and go through it. So actually, I'll go ahead and remove this all files so we can go ahead and create it from scratch, just so you can see it. So from here we can click the new button, and I'll just go ahead and call it all files, and you can see how simple this is. And if there's a particular extension or particular file name, you can obviously put that in here. And again, we allow wildcards. So the wildcard for everything is going to be a star. So I'm going to go ahead and add that in there, and that basically means any file, regardless of if it has an extension or not, is going to fit into this file property type. So we'll press OK. Now it's telling us, to use this classifier, we must add it to a rule. So if you have existing rules, you could press OK and add that here. I'm going to click cancel because we're going to create a whole new rule from scratch. But I do have that in here now, and I'll show you how to use content classifiers as well, or by type throughout this process. So now that we've set up this catch-all all files content classifier, what we're going to do is create a policy. So I'll just go here into my DLP policies, and we'll do manage policies. And this is a very clean environment. I don't have any policy. I have a little text-based policy for testing. What we're going to do is create a brand new policy and show how that works. So what we're going to do is add a new custom policy. Now it's worth noting that we do have predefined policies, and other videos will explain predefined policies. But if you have a predefined policy, such as like a HIPAA or PCI or Sarbanes-Oxley type policy, you can go ahead and add USB rules to that. Or what we're going to do here is create a specific rule that's just for USB handling. That's going to be done under custom policy. So I'll give it a name called USB device policy, which is cached from when I did this earlier. We're obviously going to want this to be enabled. And we're going to go ahead and have it create the rule as well. Fortunately, this wizard, will take us from start to finish and take care of everything that we need to do. So I'll just press next now that I've given it a name. Now, condition's an important part. This is basically what is going to make this policy sort of go off so we can act on it and kind of go down the chain here. So what we're going to want to do is add that catch-all policy. And we'll do that under file properties, but of course here we can also go into patterns and phrases. And if I do click that, I'll show that now. If you want to prohibit writing or create some action on writing of any very particular thing, you can go in here and find credit cards and say we don't want discover credit cards ever written to USB drives. You can see the list. There's 4 pages of this. It's extremely long. It's got every type of policy you can think of already built in. So you do have that available to you to use, but we're not going to show that off in this demo, but I just thought I'd point that out. So what we're going to do is add a file properties, because that's where we created that all files thing. And I can go ahead here and search for all files. I'll show you this search a little bit later, but fortunately all files shows up pretty close to the top of the alphabetical list. You can see that this one is user defined as opposed to predefined, which comes with the installation. So what we're going to do is click on that and press OK. And we can add multiple content classifiers in here as well. If you wanted to also, all files is going to catch everything, but if you wanted to mix and match some of those predefined policies with other file property types, you can go ahead and create a long list here. But now that we've got all files in here, we're going to go ahead and press next. And severity and action is what is the WebSense solution going to do once that condition's met. So basically, in this case, once there's a file, what are we going to do? And we have a couple options here. We have audit, which will just basically give an incident report, which we'll show over here later. Just let the administrators know that information was written, what information was written, etc. But what we want to do is block. So we'll just use the default block all policy. So that means any file will be blocked. We'll go to next, and then the source will allow us to say which computers or which users or OUs, that type of thing, are we going to apply this to? We're going to use this as an all default policy, but if there was one particular group, maybe it's the team that's handling source code and you don't want them to use USB, you could put them in here. We also allow you to dictate what type of endpoint, such as a static device or a laptop or something like that. We also allow you to choose between when you're connected to corporate network or when you're remote. We know that based on where our endpoint servers are. So we're just going to leave everything as all, which basically is a kind of catch-all for everything. We'll press next, and here's the destination. Now you want to be a little bit careful here because we have a very specific policy to block every file. So we only want to do that on removable media. And by default, almost everything's checked here. So certainly we don't want to prohibit people from sending any type of file over email or through a web channel or to a printer, so or over the LAN. But here we have endpoint removable media, so we'll leave that checked because that's what we want to prevent. And here you can see all types, but that earlier endpoint devices I showed you under resources, if we had that SanDisk Cruiser example, we would see that in here. We could select that. But again, we're going to just go ahead and use all. We'll press next, and then we'll have a summary of everything that we're going to do. And then ultimately we'll press finish, and it does say we must click deploy. So now that I've got this policy in here, what I'm going to do is press deploy. So this setting gets out to the endpoint servers, and then we're going to update our endpoint sort of manually, although they will update themselves, and then we'll show that policy's taking place. Now deploying can take some time, so we'll sort of wait for this to finish. Okay, so everything's been deployed successfully. It's really the endpoint servers here that are kind of critical for this, but obviously you want to see everything get deployed. So I'm going to go ahead and minimize this right now and fire up my endpoint. And the last time it was updated was 2:02 p.m. So I'm going to go ahead and just do a force update. These things do update themselves very regularly, but if you're doing any testing, you'll want to update, right at point of click. So right now it's just been updated to 2:33 p.m. We still have that USB drive plugged in. So we're going to click on that, and now I have these two files here. I'm going to drag and drop them in, and we're going to see that they'll be blocked. So you can actually see right here, it's a corporate violation to copy these files. We absolutely just can't copy them. That's exactly how the policy is defined. It doesn't matter which file it is. It just absolutely won't go on there. That's how simple it is to just block all USB removable media together. I'm going to show you a couple other things, show you a little bit more of the flexibility of the solution. So we'll go ahead and go back over here. We're going to edit that policy just to basically maybe just stop the exe, but allow the document file. And we'll go ahead and just do that by editing the rule. We don't have to create a new one. We can edit the rule. And if you remember, we put that all files catch-all here. That's why it blocks everything. If we remove that, and we'll go ahead and go back into file properties, and instead of using all files, I'll just do a search for exe, which is kind of a common thing. And you'll see here we have various executable formats. So it's not just exe; it'll do .com and other executable formats for Windows. So we're going to go ahead and click that and put it in the content classifier. So now it will only block files that are of various executable formats. Everything else remains the same because we're not modifying anything else in the policy. So I'll press OK, and again we have to deploy again because this is a brand new policy or policy update. So this will take a few moments. Okay, the new policy for the executables is deployed. So what we're going to do is update our endpoint again. Again, this will happen very quickly on its own, but for the sake of the video, I will initiate an update myself. Okay, so 235, it's updated. So now what we're going to do is go back to USB drive. Of course, we have nothing on it. I'm going to go ahead and write the exe or the doc file to it. I apologize, and that worked because that's not an executable format. Now I'll take the exe and I'll bring it over, and that got blocked. So again, it's working exactly as we defined it in that policy. To show you again that it's not extension based or name based or anything like that. Now we will look at the header. I went ahead and removed exe, so now this is just a kind of unknown type of file. But because we do look at the header, the metadata header in there, we know that it's an executable. So even though it doesn't have an extension, we know it. In fact, I'll actually change this to docx, which clearly it's not. But again, we'll try and fool the system and drag it over there. And you can see it still blocked it because we know it's an executable and not a Microsoft Office document. So again, very powerful solution there. I'll go ahead and rename this back to exe so I don't forget later. But that just shows you some very simple policies about blocking files. And of course, there's a lot of areas where you'd want to do that. And again, you can apply these policies very granularly and say only on these particular high-risk devices or devices with a lot of content on them that we don't want leaked out, let's just enforce that here, or let's just enforce it everywhere but the executives. You have that flexibility. But what we're going to do now is create another popular type of policy for USB devices, and that's to use basically corporate-wide encryption, which basically means any file that I write to this is automatically going to get encrypted, and that's going to happen transparently to the user, and it'll be able to be read by any other device in the organization that has the endpoint on it, also transparently. But if I remove it and put it into another computer that's not on the endpoint or not on the organization's domain with the endpoint deployed, it will come up as an encrypted file and it'll be completely useless. We do use AES 256-bit encryption for this, so it's very, very strong. And since you're not using passwords, your users don't know about passwords. It can't be, leaked out to a competitor or a thief or a friend. So you have a lot more tighter control over your data. So basically what we're going to do for that is create, we're going to actually edit the policy because we already have most of the policy already created here. And again, just the way our thoughtful policy management works is we have these content classifiers. So I'm not going to, change, well, I am going to change it, but anything that we change here applies. So if we want to, just encrypt executables, not that anybody would necessarily do that, I can leave that here, but I'm going to go back to that all files content classifier because that'll basically make us encrypt anything. But as you can see, you have that control to, maybe only encrypt things that, are PCI compliant related issues or HIPAA related issues or certain types of file types or things that are marked a certain way. So you have that ability, so people can still use their thumb drives maybe to move pictures of their family, but not work-related stuff. But if you want to just catch all, encrypt everything, that's what we're going to show here. But I think it's pretty clear that our solution is scalable enough to do that. And what we're going to do now is go into the severity and action. As you recall before, we were doing a block all. But we no longer want to block. We want to allow this, but we want to go ahead and encrypt automatically. And there is no default policy for that, or sorry, no default action for that. So what we're going to do is create a new action plan, which is this button here. And if you already have action plans that you want to modify, you can always do that by going to Resources, clicking on Action Plans. But we allow you to create a new action plan on the fly, which is kind of nice. Here we're going to go ahead and name this action plan. I will call it USB Encrypt. It's already in here very nicely. And this will basically show what we're going to do. And if you wanted to create a more wide and encompassing encryption policy, you could do that and have other channels on here. But since this is a USB policy that's specific to USB removable media, we're going to create this USB encrypt policy to just handle removable media. So I'm going to make sure that I allow everything in the DLP tab to be permit except that removable media. And under that removable media, I do have two options. In the earlier document I showed from the support site, kind of explained in better detail what these two are. Obviously, before we just used the standard block all, but I can create a block. I can also create a confirm here for removable media, which basically means if somebody drags and drops or copies or writes a file to USB media, it'll just ask them to confirm they want to do that. You could say something like, you really be careful doing this. Make sure you're not putting any company sensitive information on this, but still allow them to do it. We can do encrypt with profile key, which is what we're going to do. Or you can have encrypt with user password. With encrypt with user password will basically prompt them to provide a relatively complex password and go ahead and encrypt the files with that password, which then they can give to somebody else. But the encrypt with profile key will go ahead and do the automatic encryption based on the key that's built into here, which I'm going to show you after this policy is deployed. Another thing you can do here, which I should have mentioned, is when you're editing or creating this plan, there is this audit incident, which is included by default. But what's that's going to do is every time somebody copies a file, it's going to create an audit log in the incident log and let you know what that file is. And that may be worthwhile. Maybe you still really don't want people using USB key, but you want to use the encryption, so you want to know what people are doing. But if you uncheck this, it won't show up in the audit log. So that'll keep your incident log a little bit cleaner. So what I'm going to do is uncheck that so we don't see the incident. And since the block all does have an audit, we'll see the previous copies and blocks, but we won't see these encryption ones. So I thought that would be worthwhile to bring up if you want to keep your incident log free of things that are kind of acceptable practice, which in this case is encryption. So we're going to press OK. Again, we'll sort of just verify everything looks good. We'll press OK again. So as I earlier said, we can talk about how the encryption profile keys are configured by going over to the Settings tab and clicking on Endpoint, and then clicking on the default profile. And then there's the Encryption tab here. And this actually allows you to show which key is used and pass keys. If you want to rotate keys out over time, you can do that, perhaps monthly or annually or quarterly or whatnot. By default, you will already have an automatically generated system key at the time of installation. You can create other ones, and you can put a password on here. We always recommend you put an extremely complex password and don't give it out except for to a very, very select few. And that'll be helpful in case somebody has encrypted files and they don't have the endpoint, or your entire Triton infrastructure is down for maintenance or down for a disaster purpose, and you really need access to those files. That password can be used to decrypt them. There are decryption utilities for Windows and Mac, and those are downloadable. wsdecrypt.exe. Those are downloadable from mywebsense.com. But for the most part, there is an automatically generated system key. As you rotate keys through, you can leave them enabled on the endpoint, or you can you can disable them so that any file that was previously written with that encryption will no longer be readable by a device with the endpoint on it. So I did want to point that out as a way to see and control the passwords, and you can keep issuing new ones. It just basically asks you to create a password and put the same password in here, fat finger it like last time. You can see a pending key here. I'm not going to go ahead and deploy that because I don't want to, but go ahead and press delete, and then we'll go ahead and deploy the settings. So we'll come back as soon as that's done. Okay, all of those have been deployed. So what we'll do now is minimize that, and let me go ahead and delete this file because we're going to write it again. And I will update my endpoint so it gets the latest policy. Okay, so now we have the 244 policy, and if you click on this, you can actually get the policy version, etc. So we're going to go ahead and close that. And now what's going to happen is when we drag these files over, they're going to go. We will get this pop-up, and it'll say you're trying to copy or remove a file to removable media. This appears to be in violation of corporate policy. This file will be encrypted. So actually, it already is encrypted. Even though it looks unencrypted to us, that's because the endpoint transparently does this. So you can see this document is a test file. What I'll do is show how this looks on another computer. You can actually modify that text down there because maybe this isn't a corporate violation. There is an XML file or English.xml file on the Triton server. You can modify that. Of course, make a backup of the old one and be careful when modifying anything. But you could say, for the encryption specific one, that due to policy, this is mandatorily encrypted, or you can change that, and it's English.xml if you're an English language WebSense user. You can search for that, but there is a message rule area that has a bunch of those strings. So you can modify that if you're worried about your end users thinking that they're violating a policy when you're allowing them to do this, but in an encrypted manner. So what we're going to do is switch over to another PC. I'm going to go ahead and move this USB drive to another PC so you can see that it's encrypted. Okay, so here we are on another machine that does not have the endpoint on it. So this could be like a personal PC or a competitor's PC or something like that. And I just plugged that USB drive in that was automatically encrypted. And when we look at the files inside of it, what we see is a .ws extension is added to the back of them. And obviously I can't open the file at all because it's encrypted, or even if I get rid of the .ws and change it back to a doc file, it's not gonna open. It'll complain. It doesn't know what it is. You can actually see this file is protected by WebSense Triton AP Endpoint, so there is some header information inserted in there just to clarify to the user. I'm going to add the WS back to it, and and you can see that this is encrypted. What I'm going to do now is install the endpoint on this computer and then plug the USB key back in after I've installed the endpoint, and you'll see that we can just read it transparently. Okay, now that I have the endpoint installed on this computer, if I plug this USB drive back in and we click on it, you'll see that now the files are readable again. I don't see the .ws. I'm not prompted for decryption information. If I open the file, it says this document is a test file, which is what it said earlier. So you can see that it is completely transparent. So I hope that you can see the power of this solution and to how it won't stop productivity. But we still do give you the controls to completely block things. And you can mix and match settings as well, like block anything of this type, file type or file name or any of those content classifiers. You can block those or encrypt those, but not block JPEGs if you don't have a risk of any images being leaked. So you can see the value of this solution. And I'd like to thank you for watching this video. I hope you found it helpful.